Hey friends, by now you're following us in our imaginary story, being seen through the eyes of his mother Mary. And now I want you to imagine the man who stood beside you from the beginning, and when the world questioned you, the man who believed you, even when crushed, made no sense, is now gone. And he didn't go with a miracle. He went with a whisper, a fading breath, a tired hand, a vapor. That's how Joseph left. And I was not ready. No one ever is. He had grown slower. He rose later each morning. His hands still worked wood, but with more pause. His eyes, once filled with fire, now held a distant peace. He didn't complain. He just aged more quickly, faithfully. And one night, he didn't rise again. Now imagine. You have just buried your protector, your husband, the father figure to your holy son, and you're left with a house full of questions and children who still need their daily bread. Joseph died before Jesus began his public work, before the water turned to wine, before the blind can see, before the cross. He never saw what Jesus would become, but he believed. I still remember his last words. He called for Jesus, and Jesus came, quietly, instantly. He knelt beside him, took his hand, and Joseph whispered something I never heard, but Jesus did, and he nodded several times, and I wept, because I knew what that moment meant. He placed his hands upon Jesus's head, and then Joseph died with peace, but I remained with silence, gasping quietly. Now imagine, a boy, now a man, with calloused hands and heaven in his eyes, standing by the bed where the only earthly father he ever knew has just breathed his last, and he doesn't cry loud. He just stands there, looking still, reverent, because this was holy too. We buried him near sundown, near the olive trees. Simple, unseen, no trumpet, no temple, just tears. Jesus stood with me. He said no words. He placed his hand on my shoulder, and the silence between us was louder than any prayer. Joseph was never in the spotlight, but he was the roof over our heads, the quiet laughter, the steady hammer, the evening psalms, and now there was only absence. Jesus took on more after that. He fixed more furniture, he led more prayers, he stepped into the role without anyone asking, because that's who he was. He obeyed, even in his grief. Now imagine, you are watching your son become a man, but the cost of that manhood is the loss of his father. He didn't speak of Joseph much, but I saw it in the way he slowly picked up Joseph's tools, in the way he helped the neighbors, in the way he sat at the table at night. He carried Joseph's heart in his work. There were days I thought I would collapse. Too many people, too much silence, too much loss. But Jesus, he would place his hand on my back, and everything steadied and came back into focus again. People talk about miracles, but one of the first ones I ever saw was how Jesus carried his grief, not by running from it, but by walking through it. Joseph never saw the ministry, never saw the miracles, never saw the cross, but I believe he saw enough to know that his obedience gave God a home on earth. Now imagine this. God chooses you not for your spotlight, but for your surrender. That was Joseph. His legacy wasn't power, it was presence. It was quiet courage. It was believing what the world called foolish. It was protecting a woman with a secret and raising a child with a destiny. After Joseph's death, Nazareth felt different. The world seemed to lean heavier, like we were one step closer to something we couldn't name. Jesus spoke less, but thought more. He lingered longer in the hills. He prayed more deeply at night. Sometimes I would find him, sitting where Joseph used to work, running his fingers slowly along the wood again. He never said it, but I knew. He missed him. Now imagine, the savior of the world, mourning the man who taught him how to shape trees into tables. It was a strange comfort, knowing that even Jesus grieved and teared up, that even he felt the sting of goodbye, not because God had failed, but because of his love. And love always leaves a mark. I learned something in those years. God's calling doesn't erase pain. It gives it purpose. Joseph's death didn't shake Jesus' mission, but I believe it did help shape it. Jesus began speaking differently after that day. Not to the crowds, not yet, but to me, to his brothers, to God. He started preparing. Even just before then, I began preparing too, because something inside me was speaking, and I knew more loss would come. And one day it wouldn't be Joseph I buried. It was a feeling that I didn't want. I didn't ask for. A feeling that shook me deep in my bones. The same feeling when we fled in the night. It would be the son I bore. But that day had not come yet. For now, Jesus was still here, still home, still faithful. And in his faithfulness, he held the ache Joseph left behind. Now, there's something about this moment between Jesus and Joseph that feels deeply familiar. And I want to share something with you today. My friends, maybe it's because I know what it's like to lose a father at a young age. I know what it's like to feel alone, unblessed, unspoken for. And I know what it's like to carry that emptiness for years. But I also know what it's like to be met by God, not in a sermon, not in a crowd, but in a moment of pain so raw, I had no strength left to hide. I was walking outside, under attack, burdened, and emotionally undone. I prayed, and then I heard a voice, not imagined, not invented. It was loud and clear, so real it stopped me in my tracks, and it said, "I'll be your father." And I knew exactly who it was. That moment, I broke, but not from despair. I broke because of love, because I had been seen, because the very God I didn't know how to reached for me, and everything changed. So when I see Jesus kneeling beside Joseph, I see more than a goodbye. I see a father waiting to speak. When every other voice goes silent, and maybe, just maybe, he's waiting to speak to you too. If you've made it this far, thank you, not just for watching, but for sitting with the silence, the sorrow, and the stillness of this moment. What we shared here wasn't just a story about Jesus and Joseph. It was about all of us. Those who have lost, those still searching, and those waiting to hear the Father's voice. If something in this spoke to you, if it stirred something you couldn't quite explain, you're not alone. I've been there too. That voice I heard, the one that said, "I'll be your father," that voice still speaks, and it may be whispering to you now. If you're on a journey of healing, if you're searching for answers or just longing to feel seen by God, I invite you to walk with us. This series isn't just about Jesus' hidden years. It's about how his life touches our own in ways we don't always expect. So if this resonated with you, subscribe to the channel, share this with someone you care about, or just leave a comment below. Not for numbers, but because maybe your story matters here too. We've got more episodes ahead, more quiet places to visit, and more light to uncover. Until next time.